We're talking today with Mr. Dewey Lenger of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Now, Mr. Lenger, can you begin with some background on yourself? To start with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan, May 21st, 1922.
Okay. Now, did you grow up in Grand Rapids, or did you move somewhere else?
I lived in Hopkins, Michigan as well.
Okay.
For, well, the first 4 grades of my school. Went there, and then I came back into Grand Rapids.
Okay. And what was your family doing for a living at that time?
My dad at that time was, in Hopkins, was a manufacturer of furniture.
Okay. Now, was he able to keep his job during the Depression, or?
No.
Okay.
He had to sell out. We moved back to Grand Rapids. That's one of the reasons, because he found out the competition kept getting tougher and tougher, you know what I mean? And then he wanted to make it cheaper and cheaper. Mm-hmm. He said, I can't do it. Yeah. So we folded, or he did.
And then what did he do after that?
After that, he went into the popcorn business for a while, and from there, over the years, and then we helped him with that. I say as a kid, package things. Then he went into buying used cars. And so he stayed with that practically for the rest of his time. Prior to that there, when he was working, he was a builder, architect, and that sort of thing, you know. He did that till he got into married life, and he went to Hopkins, and that changed things around quite a bit for him.
Okay. Now, how many kids were in your family?
I have 3 brothers and 3 sisters, and myself.
Okay.
There's 7 of us.
Yeah, and where were you in line?
I was 3rd in line.
Okay. Now, did you finish high school?
Yes.
Okay. And where did you go to high school?
I finished high school in Davis Tech.
Okay. Was that in Grand Rapids?
That was in Grand Rapids, downtown Grand Rapids, where was now the education building.
Okay.
There, yep.
All right. And what did you do then after you graduated?
After I graduated, I went to Muskegon and worked there in a factory, because it was getting into the 40s then. And I had a job offered me 2 years prior to me even graduating, because I was into machine work and it went into tool and die. And I went to the Morton Manufacturing Company in there, and I worked there for about 1.5 years. I'm not sure the exact time, something like that, 2 years. Drove back and forth every day. There was 4 of us. We ganged up, you know, changed cars, and of course you have to be there at 7 o'clock in the morning. The winter wasn't a pleasant time, and we worked 10, 12 hours a day. Yeah. Made things for the Navy.
Okay. Yeah, a commute from Grand Rapids to Muskegon at that point of time would not be as simple as it is now.
No, it was not. It was a 2-lane road all the way, and not always plowed. You know.
All right. Now, were you working there when Pearl Harbor happened?
Yes.
Okay. And how did you learn about Pearl Harbor?
How did I learn about it? I was in Grand Rapids. I had a car. I was driving down Fulton Street, just passing Jefferson Avenue before I got to the park up there, and I heard it on the radio.
Right. Now, before that happened, had you been paying any attention to what was going on in the world? You know, there's a war going on in Europe.
Not really. I was working with a chief Navy man in Muskegon there, and he talked about it somewhat, but we didn't know anything about what was going on that much. You know, we weren't that much into it, although we were into military building things, you know, machinery and stuff.
But you weren't quite putting all the pieces together that this might translate into us going to a war.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, was the job you were doing the kind of job that could get you a deferment?
Yes, yes. I left Muskegon. Well, it's a little story. I came in with a friend of mine. He said, I want to, it was a Saturday noon, and directly in Muskegon, in Grand Rapids here was wide open on Saturday yet. And I said, I'm not going to sit in the car because it was cold. This was January. It was colder. And this car didn't heat up too well. It was a new car, but it didn't work well. Anyway, we went in, and he asked me what I was doing. I told him. He says, he asked me what I was making. I told him. And he said, well, he bumped the price. He says, how would you like to start to work Monday? I said, no, I'll take it a week from Monday. But so I went to Jarecki, tool and die, and was a tool and die maker until, and as you say, deferment, yes. A lot of the guys I went to high school were deferred there.
All right. Now, did you then leave that position voluntarily to enter the service, or how did you wind up there?
I saw a small article in the paper, which I don't really usually read at that time at a young age, you know. And it said they were given the exam for cadets, flying cadets. And I went down to the old Armory on Michigan and Ionia, I think it is, on the corner there. And it was about a 3-hour exam. And of course, then afterwards we came back at 1 o'clock and you started reading off, you passed or you didn't pass. And I got there a couple minutes late because I couldn't find a parking place. I learned very quickly what a sergeant means. He said, I told you to be here at 1, no excuses. He said, well, let me look at it. He said, you passed. So that's how I got into that. That was my first step going into the service. I passed that, and then I had to have a physical. Oh, 2 things. I had to have a physical, I had to get a release from the draft board. So I went to the draft board, and it was an old school teacher of mine that was there at the time, and he said, well, I can't give you a release. He says, you're on the next month's draft. I said, yes, but I haven't had anything at all. No blood test, nothing. Okay, you got 30 days. Well, to do that, and I had to go to Kalamazoo and get sworn in there at the end of the month of October. This was in the 1st of October, and I got sworn in at the end of October when they met there again, the board that was giving tests for pilots and stuff.
Okay.
And that was the first day that the 35-mile speed limit went into effect, too.
35-mile-an-hour speed limit.
That's what at that time.
Was that
yes.
Was that lower than what it had been or higher?
I'm sorry?
Was that a higher speed limit or a lower one?
Lower.
So saving gas?
There was no speed limit prior to that, basically, on the road, Maybe 50 or 60, but, well, most cars didn't go by 50 or 60 anyway. But that's where I got sworn in, and I learned, Sergeant, well, you want to go in or you want to go to right away? Or I said, well, I'll go. And he said, I tell you what I'll do. I recommend that you don't. You go back and they'll give you a letter. They'll give you at least 48 hours. Well, I was working at Directly. The phone rang in there, and they called me in, and it was noon, approximately. And my mother was on. She said, I got a letter from the War Department. And this is the 26th of January. She said, you had to be in Detroit tomorrow morning on the 27th. Mm-hmm. So, and unfortunately, my neighbor also worked there, and we rode together. Well, I didn't have a car, so I had to walk from there back home in the winter, get my car, get my tools and everything, go back. And I went to Detroit with a cousin of mine. We both enlisted at the same time.
Okay.
That was in 42.
Okay. Now, before the time when
43 is when they gave me my call, January 27th of 43.
Right. Now, before you actually went in and you saw that ad in the newspaper for the cadets, had you been thinking about trying to get into the Air Corps, or did you just think you would wait until someone drafted you?
No. Yes, well, when I was a kid, I walked from Godfrey and Burton Street. I lived down there by the school there, and I walked all the way to the airport just to see airplanes. So I was interested way back then. I had a definite interest. And when I saw the ad there about taking to school, that's what brought me there to do that.
Okay. Now, so you've gone down to Detroit. Now you're getting inducted and so forth. What happens once you get there?
Once we get to, I have to go to the train station. As I say, I rode with my cousin and his girlfriend, and she drove back. But that's how we were brought there, and there was just tons of guys. I don't know how many hundreds of them. They were just from all over the country. We were there. We were put on a train, and we probably left the Detroit area somewhere late afternoon, early evening. And we took that, and next thing you're on the train, and you go through a smoker car to get your eats and so forth. It's about, I remember it, 3 nights and 2 days. Mm-hmm. And after the 3rd night, you don't know where you're at. They get you off, get you on a truck, take you out, and then I landed at Miami Beach, between 12th and 13th Avenue, and we had to stay on the beach for the day because the Tides Hotel there was not ready for us yet. They were still getting things in there and beds and everything else. And then we were assigned, and I was assigned on the 9th floor, and they had elevators, but we could not use them. So that became a little bit of a chore. That's my first introduction into the service, going from there. That was my basic.
All right. Now, how long did you spend then in Miami?
I'm not sure. I would say something around about 8 to 10 weeks, somewhere in that area.
Okay. Now, was this now just kind of Army basic training for you, or were you getting some of the pre-flight stuff too?
No, we were getting just strictly basic training. Probably the first 10 days we had to wait before we could get our uniforms, and then they issue our uniforms, and we did our golf training. Our training on the golf courses, you know, close order and the guns, and taken out to the range to shoot, and so it's just basic rudimental training for everybody going in there to learn the fundamentals of discipline in the service.
Right. And what kinds of people were training you at that point? Were they just regular drill instructors, or?
Very sharp drill instructor. We had a real sharp one there. Yeah, they were people that had some service time.
Okay. And how easy or hard was it for you to adjust to military life?
I can't say it was very difficult. Not at all. You learn to go along. We got a haircut every week whether we wanted it or not. You know, those sort of things. So you learn to follow the orders. You learn to do what you have to do. Don't fight it.
Okay. Now, were all the people you were there in with, were they all part of the same cadet program? Were you all trying to get into flight training?
Basically, yes. Yeah. Flight training. At that time, we were not, as they called, classified yet.
Yeah.
That came a little bit later on.
Okay. Now, do they sort you out while you're still there in those first 10 weeks, or do you move on somewhere else for the next stage of training?
Well, yes. We took a number of different tests and so forth, physicals and others while we were there. From there, I was sent to Cincinnati, Ohio, University of Cincinnati, CTD, College Training Detachment. And they started giving some upgrading there, and we did some more training there. And I became, of course, prior to that, before I had got enlisted in, I was with what they call the Michigan Guards, because the National Guard had been called up, and then they formed the Michigan Guards, and I made sergeant there. So that when we got to Cincinnati, they asked for people that had previous service, and so they could make platoon leaders out of them, and I became one of those.
Okay. Yeah. What had the Michigan Guard activity consisted of?
Nothing more than drills.
Okay.
Just drills, just getting people, you know, in the event of, and that was a far-fetched event, you know what I'm saying? I was young, fresh.
Okay. All right. But it did you good in that sense. You moved a little bit ahead when you went on to this next stage.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
The primary training down there, as in Miami Beach, was something I had done myself up here, you know. I knew, but you still have to follow what's going on.
All right. Now, you're at the University of Cincinnati. Were you basically getting college course work?
Some college courses, right, and not too much with the military yet, but we were doing military training and conditioning.
Okay. Now, were you getting any kind of training that was actually related to the Air Corps, or was it still just the general training conditioning?
Just general training.
Okay.
General, right.
Now, why were they sending you to college?
Good question. I never did find that out. There was a bunch of people that had gone to college. Maybe it was because they were backing up and they thought, well, we'll just send you to college before you get into classification center.
Yeah. The other thing that some of the veterans who were pilots will say is also that there had been expectations, certainly before the war, that anyone going into pilot training be a college graduate, or
That's
at least
true.
have some college education. Yep. So you were kind of getting caught up in a way with the
Perhaps,
program.
yeah, because they dropped it. You had, I think it was a minimum of 2 years prior to that, as I remember.
Yeah. And then at certain times they fiddled with that a little bit.
Yep, they did. Yep.
And you got in
that's
with
what the exam was all about. When we took it out, see if you pass it, you were eligible to go the rest of the way.
Right. Okay. Now, about how long did you spend in Cincinnati?
I would say I probably spent about 2 months there.
Okay. And what was there a daily routine there?
It was daily military routine.
But in terms of how you spent your day, get up.
We had classroom and stuff like that, and the other half of the day would be out, either doing physical exercises or stuff like that.
And then what did you do at night?
Not a whole lot.
Study?
Study, somewhat. Yeah, because we didn't know what to do. You didn't have a lot of money, you know. You stay with your friends and stuff.
Okay. And did they have you in a specific dormitory or a place by yourselves?
We were in the dormitory like that, and it was very Which see, limited later on, there was the class system there, the upper class, lower class. You're 4 weeks lower class, then you become 4 weeks upper class, or 4.5 weeks actually, and because it's a 9-week program, upper class. And you get it pretty tough. And then there was what they call I forget what they call it, it's an extra day between when the lower class can work on the upper class. That would give them a bad time. You know. But that's why, but they later on eliminated that.
All right. Now, after this, did you go on to another college, or did you go now into proper training?
From there, I went to San Antonio, Texas, into what they call Classification Center. It was a large place south of San Antonio. And we took there, and then again, just all kinds of exams and so forth. We had to take the flight exam and physical, and I probably walked 20 feet away, and he said, "Hey, wait, come back here." So I did, and he says, "Jump on your leg," and stuff like that, and he checked my heart, and he says, "Hey." And then I went to Randolph Field with 5 other fellows to check out their hearts, because he heard a murmur of some nature, but I did return back there. Of the 5, 2 of us came back, the other 3 went home. You see, they just ran them out. And I got back just in time to catch up with my unit that was marching across the street where pre-flight started.
All right. So you're with your unit, you're with your class, you go forward. What did pre-flight consist of?
Pre-flight consisted of all ground school, including, math, history, not teletype, but Morse code and everything like that, you know, because at that time Morse code was a means of it, and plus much drilling.
All right. Now, were you learning to do things like identify aircraft, or learning anything about aeronautics?
We had aircraft identification, yeah. Just shadows up on the wall. They'd go up there and you had to mark down what it was. You give them, well, first a second, and then it would cut down to less than a second to identify them.
All right. And now at this point, you're all as pre-flight, they're all planning on having you become pilots. Now at this stage, do they start to weed people out here, or at the end of this term, do all of you move on to the next level, or?
Move on in sections.
Okay.
Our section was the first section to go to Cincinnati. And then others came in, and then we were the first class to go back out.
Okay.
A group of people, you know, I don't remember all the names and how many people were in it. It was a fair amount.
Okay. Well, you get through the pre-flight school, and then what's the next step?
Oh, from pre-flight, pre-flight you stay there, and then they assign you to a place of where you learned to fly. And that was up in Stanford, Texas, up in the Panhandle.
All right. Can you describe that base or that facility?
It was a small private base. The instructors were civilians. We flew the open cockpit, single engine PT-19. And this was in the fall, coming into winter. I made Christmas through there. So you had the leather and wool coats and everything on, and boots and everything like that, but you still got cold in there. There was no heaters. But I had a very excellent instructor there. I soloed there in 6 hours. In fact, he held me back, and I said, because this one chap we bid it up with, he says, "You better wait at least one more time, a little bit, and then you could go ahead and solo, you know." Then you go from there.
So what was it like flying an airplane yourself for the first time?
It was thrilling, believe me. And to this day, I think it's the greatest thing in the world. But, you know, there was these were inline engines, and there was a notice on the board that says, "Do not fly inverted more than 2 minutes." Well, for the fact of the reason that the oil wasn't set, it wasn't pressured, you know, at that time. So I thought, Well, nobody's going to do that. Well, the first time you turn over, you think you drop about that far out of your seat. Actually, you probably move maybe that much because he conditions you to say, everything tight, you got your belt on, like, here we go. The first time you go over, well, then you start to, after that, you start to learn maneuvers, all different types of maneuvers, loops and MMNs and stalls and how the aircraft reacts to different projects that you get into.
Now, how long did you spend at that stage of training, do you think?
About 9 weeks.
Okay.
Most of them were in about a 9-week increment.
And about how many hours of flying time do you get?
You flew probably a couple hours a day,
So it'll add up.
Yeah, it adds up. And you enter ground school, along with it is you still get more training about flight, how to navigate and stuff. It's just rudimentary at first because you're not ready to do any more than that. You're concentrating on flying the aircraft first.
All right. Now, did many people in the group you went in with, did some of them wash out at that point or not make it?
In primary, I don't remember from my class anybody washing out there.
And were there...
But that was the sword over your head all the time, washout.
And then were there any accidents on the field while you were there?
Not any accidents of that nature. There was one close one. In fact, he took off. He should not have because there was a little skim of frost on his wings. And he took off and he was just up and down, up and just staying above the treetops. He made a big circle. And finally, he came back. He lucked out.
Okay. Now, but those planes were relatively easy to fly, weren't they? I mean,
quite easy, yeah.
Okay.
Quite forgiving.
Now, what then, after primary then, what do you get next?
Basic training.
Okay.
You go into the BT-13, which is a much larger aircraft. It's got many more things in there that you have to, because it's a controllable prop and gear comes up and all that sort of thing. And where the other ones is pretty fundamental. You just have the fundamental instance, the altimeter, airspeed, and ball and needle and stuff like that. That's all you have, and your compass, But you still don't have digital compass at that time.
Okay, but now you've got a more sophisticated machine with instruments more like the ones they have in the actual
a little bit
military
more,
aircraft.
Yeah. The instructor I had, we went out to see the aircraft. He said, he pointed me, get in the seat. So he said, well, start it up. Well, this is the second day, and he gave us a sheet, looking at it. Well, I didn't even know what the aircraft was. Well, we fuddled around. He told me what to do, and I got it started, like that. But he was, being in primary, it was difficult to satisfy this particular chap. I think I learned to fly that aircraft more completely with my instrument pilot instructor, because he was precise but fair.
Okay. Now, did you have some version of a flight simulator as well? I mean, like a box that you'd be inside? And
we started to get simulation at that point there, and that's for blind flying.
Right. So that was your instrument flying instruction or some of it?
Right, yeah. Now, in basic, we lost some people there. Quite often it would collide, or it was the basic leg. It didn't have a down leg in the basic, just a basic leg, and it would get, if we'd all call in, it would get quite long because we'd go to an auxiliary field of practice, and if somebody turned too, we were about 1,500 feet. You turned too sharp, it would stall out and they would go into the ground. We lost a few that way. You had to be very careful because it would just snap right out of it. You'd lose it.
Okay.
And not enough time to get.
All right, so now as you get to the bigger, more sophisticated plane, it gets a little bit more dangerous.
Yes, it does.
As far as that goes.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, again, do the people you train with, do they mostly pass and make it on to the next level, or do they start to weed out people because they're not good enough pilots?
They start to weed them. Yep. This is, now you're getting into your second phase of training. Actually, it's three phases of flight training. The next one would be advanced.
Okay. Now, were you doing the basic at the same place that you were doing the primary, or had they moved you?
No, that was over on the other side of Texas in Perrin, Texas. That's on the north part of Texas over there.
Okay. All right.
I spent about, again, most of them are 9-week courses, approximately.
During the time when you're at these different flight schools, do you get any time off? Can you go into town somewhere or do anything?
No.
Or you're pretty much just stuck?
Pretty much on the base, right, yeah.
Okay. And I guess in these smaller places, there wouldn't have been too much to do anyway.
Not a whole lot, no. The people around there, the people themselves, the residents there were pretty good to us. They would, someone would come out and invite us to dinner and stuff. It was pretty nice. Yeah. So when you leave there, you go down to advance. Now you're getting into the final edge.
Okay. And what kind of aircraft do you fly in advanced?
I was flying a twin engine, 10, AT-10, you know? And there you get into, it's where you get into full instrument, well, you get it in basic training as well, because it's pilot, co-pilot. The pilot sits up front and the co-pilot, or in the back, the instructor. And then they pull a hood over your head. And so you can't see out, then you get up and you fly from there.
Right.
So, but the instructor, of course, can see out. He knows what's going on.
Okay. But now with a twin engine, you'd have 2 seats next to each other now?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's next to each other with twin controls.
Okay. Now, was this plane any harder to fly than the last one was, or were they about the same as far as you could tell?
No, it wasn't any more difficult. Just had 2 engines. You had a little more to consider. You had and then you had double gauges for everything. Everything it was. Instead of single, it became double. And you first look at it and say, whoa. But it becomes like everything else. It becomes second nature to you.
Okay. Now, by the time you get through advanced, do you know how many hours of flight time you had?
No, I don't. I didn't keep track of it. But we're flying practically every day. So I would say something I hadn't really thought about. How many hours we get, because a lot of our flights, well, it extended because we got cross country and basic and stuff. So we started extending there. We'd have 3-4 hour flights.
Okay. So yeah. How far afield did you fly? How far did you go?
Hundreds of miles sometimes. Yeah. It was, you go in the course, you have to go this checkpoint to that checkpoint to, then it'd be a long leg. You have to touch down there, get a cup of coffee and check in, then you get it and you come back. But first it's daytime and then it gets into nighttime and you get nighttime flying.
Now, what was it like flying for the first time at night?
It's a little different. The hardest thing about that is you have to get adjusted to, you don't see the world when you're coming in for a landing. You know, you see but it's not the same perspective you have. And the fellow I had with me, Leeds, he had a hard time landing at night. Very, very tough.
Okay. Now, at the advanced stage, were there more problems with accidents at that point, or?
Yes. Yeah. Again, it was foolishness most of the time. Like coming in, one plane was above the other. And they came up and on landing, see? But I almost had that same thing in basic training. Coming in, I was coming down and making my landing and it looked fine. And I had the tower was up there and they gave a green light, a red light. Well, I had a green light coming down. I'm coming down, I looked down below there and I said, uh-oh. I poured a coal line went on. There was somebody right below me. And they never, because I was about 35, 40 degrees into the turn, then they shut it off, then they came on with the radio, because up until then, it's all radio silence. And then they said, oh, thank you, you know. I thank you because I hate to land on top of somebody. Yeah. But that happens. This is nighttime, see? It's not daytime.
Okay. All right. Now, once you complete advanced.
Yes, sir.
Now, do you have a commission yet, by the way, or are you still just a
when you
cadet or
complete
trainee?
advanced, you're commissioned.
Okay.
That was the 27th of June of 43.
Right. Okay. And you receive your commission, and then at this point now.
44, rather.
Okay. Yeah. And so now at this point, do you you actually now learn to fly the kind of military aircraft that you'll be assigned to, or what happens next?
Well, it was getting closer and more difficult. I was sent, well, I had a 10-day delay en route. I went home, and that's the first time I got away from the field, and then came back, and I went back to San Antone and went to an administrative school there for a few weeks. I don't know how many weeks it was. And then he transferred me up to Waco Field, and I went with the production line maintenance in there because I had mechanical knowledge, and they put me in there. And then I also my job was to every plane that came off the line had to be test flighted, and it was my job.
Okay. So, and what kind of planes did they have there?
That was the twin engine A-10.
Okay, so it's still the trainers.
It's the same one yet, yeah.
All right.
And the 25 started to come in, and we had a plane that didn't last very long. It was a 19, a big one. We had a little of that, but the Air Force was getting a little bit tighter then because they were getting more and more people in there. So these were kind of holding stations for us. And there was up on the board, you can volunteer for 17s or 24s or whatever you want in that respect. Primarily 17s and 24s. And I thought, well, if I'm going to fly that, they're going to have to tap me on the shoulder. That's not my choice. My first choice all the time was a P-38.
So you wanted to be a fighter pilot?
Yeah. But that, you get some training. You get this kind of training nonetheless, and even in the other aircraft. But they don't assign you yet. You're not assigned at that time. So I was, as I say, I went to Waco, and I spent some weeks there, probably a month and a half. I'm not even sure. Time just kind of flows together. And again, we loaded up on a train, wound up in Greensboro, North Carolina, getting ready to go overseas. And from there, we went up to New Jersey, and then we boarded a ship there and went overseas.
Now, before you headed overseas, had you ever flown any aircraft except training aircraft?
Other than the 19, it was a bigger cargo ship, yeah.
Okay. But had you flown a C-47 yet, or a C-46, anything like that?
No.
Okay.
No.
So you've been trained to fly, but you haven't been trained in the specific aircraft they were using.
But you've got all the fundamentals that are necessary for any aircraft.
Okay. All right. Now, then, where do they ship you out from?
From Camp Kilmer in New Jersey. From there. That's where I went from there. I went from Greensboro to Camp Kilmer, and then on to the board ship.
All right. And what kind of ship did they put you on?
On the Ile de France, a single ship. We went across, not in Congo or in a convoy, but in a single. So it was a 7-day trip. Okay. We landed in Scotland.
So this would have been a converted ocean liner, so it went faster?
It was an ocean liner, yeah. It was a passenger ocean liner.
Okay. And what kind of quarters did you have on that boat?
Tight. There were just as many bunks as they could get in any room. They would put up there, 3, 4 high, depending on the ceilings.
Now, were you above the water line or below it, or?
I was probably at the water line.
Okay.
So
you were not a really high priority passenger there. You were just a regular guy.
Nobody was. You just, wherever you got assigned is where you went. Some were a lot lower, a lot worse off than we were.
Okay. Now, how rough a trip was it?
With the exception of one extremely 24-hour period, it wasn't too bad. But that one 24-hour out there, it was very tough. Nobody could have gone on deck or anything else. It was that tough because it was, and in fact, I had on the way home, I had the same thing.
Now, did a lot of people get sick on the boat?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Some of them even got sick as soon as they got on the boat. Just the thought of the water being around them. It's a psychological thing.
Yeah. Okay. And then where do you land?
Landed up in Scotland. I can't tell you the name of the town now. It was a repo camp where everybody was in there. It was kind of crude. It was wet up there all the time and muddy. I remember that very well. You get all mud all over you like that. I was there a very short time, maybe a week at the most.
Did they have any kind of barracks, or were you in tents? Or?
No, we were at that time. We were in barracks at the time up there.
Okay.
But then the same thing happened. Your name comes up. You're put on a train again.
And so where do they send you?
They sent me down to Cottesmore Air Force Base, which would be something similar to West Point, but not as large. It was a big, pretty good sized field that was, with good structures and everything else, permanent.
And then what did you get assigned to do once you got there?
And I was there, given the quarters, and they walked down. I finally had to go down, to the second day, get myself oriented. I went down there and found out where I was assigned. I walked in there and said, well, what are we doing here? He said, well, you want to go for a flight? I said, yeah. Well, then I do. I didn't know, we didn't even know what kind of aircraft we were going to fly until I got on the flight line. And it was a C-47. Well, the fellow says to me, you sit in the co-pilot seat. We got a little trip. We got to take a glider over to another field. He said, if I tell you to pull that handle up there, pull it. Don't ask questions. Well, that would be the one to release the rope that goes to the glider. You know, that was my first flight. And I spent some time there, and we did a lot of training there. And we did work as well, but a lot of we were training for a lot of night flights in large formations. And it could get very, very bad over there as far as no horizons.
Yeah.
And the aircraft have wing lights underneath here. If you're in line, you can see them. If you can't, you don't, you know. That's how you have to fly formation. And one night I was out, I was still co-pilot. I was out with this chap that had come up through Africa, and he got vertigo. And we was about a 3.5 hour mission. We were flying, and then you slow down, and then you speed up, you know, for simulator drops and so forth, because when you drop them, you do slow down. And I had to fly the whole flight from the right seat and came and bring it in on the right hand side. You know, he couldn't fly at all. And it was, and getting there, we had to peel off 3 at a time. We couldn't all get in line because of the conditions that night. We touched down. He said, "Okay, you're first pilot from this time on." So that's when I became first pilot.
Right. Now, when you were doing the training, did you do much training towing gliders, or was it usually just flying the plane by itself?
Primarily flying the plane by itself. Gliders were an add-on, and we used them. We did have them. Yeah. Okay. It was not a case of you had to have any training flying a glider. You know what I mean? I got involved with them quite a bit later on.
All right. Now, you say you did some regular missions in addition to training at this point. I mean, were you carrying troops or cargo from place to place?
Everything. Yep, troops, cargo. Go down to Greenham Commons, which is a big depot, and pick up all the supplies or whatever it is, and deliver up front to as close to the front as you can get. 9 times out of 10, we would land in on a grass field or something. You know what I mean? Because they're very good at that.
Now, when did you start doing that, going over onto the continent and flying missions over there?
That would be I got there in October. That would be in probably November.
Okay. So pretty quickly you're going and doing that.
Yeah, it didn't take long.
And then do you remember kind of where you went or what countries or what places you flew to?
Well, let's see, we flew out of England. But going out of England, you have to follow a certain line and go out a certain place. And that's the first place I fought. We were in formation. We had an 18-ship formation going across, and it was all cloudy. And I looked out there, and there's black puff coming up there. It's aircraft, anti-aircraft. Hey, you're out of line. Get over where you have to be, because you had to go in a certain area and come back in and out the same area.
Okay. Because there were still Germans occupying parts of the Channel Coast there, around Calais and in the Netherlands, so you didn't want to fly over them.
No. Well, there's a couple islands out there that never did get repatriated from the Germans.
That's true, Channel Islands, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You flew over there, you might even get shot at there. You never know, you know. And this scoop that I flew with would not fly over a ship on the English Channel, because they came up through Africa. And you remember, if they came, when they went into Italy from Africa and they got shot at, the Americans did, from the U.S. Navy.
Right.
They didn't trust anybody. They would go around it. So.
Okay. But then did you fly to France, to Belgium, to the Netherlands?
France, Belgium, Germany, Australia, Italy, all over.
Okay. Now, did you ever get into a situation where you were getting shot at, or did you ever see any German aircraft?
Yeah. Yeah. The biggest time we got, most of it was when we crossed the Rhine.
Okay.
In fact, I was just off the lead edge there, and my roommate was up front with the commander. I see him get shot down right there. And I had a wingman on both sides, and they got shot up pretty bad. I was pretty lucky. They missed me and got them on that particular crossing.
All right. I want to get back to that a little bit later on here. So you start flying back and forth in November, and then in the middle of December, the Battle of the Bulge starts up.
Yes.
Did you have any missions that were related to that in any way?
I had a mission to bring our troops up there. There was 3 aircraft of us, and we flew into a field again, dropped off. We had loaded up a Jeep and the crew into the C-47. You can get one in there. You have to kind of hit. Anyway, we dropped it off. And we flew back. It was dark. By the time we got back, flew over Paris, and it was lit up just like this here. It's the only thing, everything was black. We got to the field up there in England there, came down into Greenham Commons, which is a repo depot, and touched down, and everything was okay. I said to the I said to the guys, come on over, we'll have a cup of coffee or something like that. And he says, so in a few minutes, they put their ships away, and they came over and they said, look out. Couldn't see. That's when the fog rolled in. If you remember, that day, at the time the fog rolled in for 3 solid days, you couldn't see a man 100 feet, 100 yards, maybe not even 100 feet ahead of you.
And so you were grounded for all that time?
We were grounded. We were supposed to go back and do some more resupply, but we couldn't get out of there. That's when the real thing happened at the Battle of the Bulge there.
Right. Because the Germans were taking advantage of the bad weather,
yep.
So that we couldn't fly over.
We couldn't get there. Okay.
All right.
Where do you want to go from here?
We were talking about, we had kind of gotten to the point where the Battle of the Bulge was going on and you were fogged in. Now, once the fog did lift then, later, at the end of December of 44, could you go back to resupply?
We would go right. Just as soon as it lifted, we were all set to go, you know.
And then were you carrying supplies or troops or?
Combination sometimes. It was, they had it, well, we go back a ways when Patton was there. We carried tons and tons of fuel for him because he was moving faster than they were bringing it to him. And we'd carry it forward and forward. And we had a number of planes that hit stuff. You have to go in low because of the radar stuff and hit something and blow up, you know. And it happens. You know, those are the things that happen.
When you were carrying fuel, how did you transport it? Were they just in jerry cans?
In jerry cans, locked down.
Okay.
Yeah, all jerry cans, yeah. Although later on, at one time when our distance got greater and greater, they put large tanks behind our bulkheads, and that was our surplus because we could get the fuel, you know, for ourselves.
Right.
We'd run it because we had long trips, and we didn't get back to our base every night. There's many times I slept in the aircraft and go from there to the next point, and the next point, and the next point, you know. You live out of the, well, we would transport it K rations and C rations, you know what they are. With a little hole back there, you throw a couple of them in there. So when you're on your own, you got something to eat.
Right.
You're not there's no restaurants or anything else, you know.
Okay, so you land someplace in Europe and just land in a field somewhere, or just stay in the air and keep flying?
You go to a place where you have to for your next, and you go from there the next day. But it's a field primarily. Right. There's no nothing around it, anything like that. Okay. You know, most of the places we landed were not established fields. You know, because well, you asked about gliders. I had to take a set of gliders. Well, there's 3 of us again. To a field called B-44. And that's on the map. You have to find it and everything. It was outside of Poix, which is about 90 miles north of Paris, a small little place. And as we got closer to the channel, it got rougher and rougher. In the air, we had to climb and climb and climb to get up over the stuff because the glider can't take this kind of, we could probably go through it. They couldn't. So we got to about 10,000 feet before we got over it. And then we started letting down. When you let down, you have to pull back because they won't take the high speed either. It'll fall apart. You know, they were made out of just about like a model airplane. It
was like aluminum
fabric.
And canvas? And,
Canvas.
Canvas.
Yeah, and painted. Because if you were in a glider and you landed, you didn't worry about the door. You could go out the side if you wanted to. But we landed, well, there's 3 of us. And I elected to say, all right, we dropped the gliders. I'll go down and pick up the pilots, you know. And didn't think anything about it. And then we went back. That became my next base. I didn't know that at the time. That was in Poix, France, at B-44. And that was a single runway and had to land on the grass there because the there's shell marks and potholes from shells on the runway. But it was a short runway.
Well, how long did you stay there?
I'm not sure. We were there. We lived in tents there. I was there. Boy, it's hard to say. Time just goes on. I was there probably several months at least. I know.
Was that where you were based at the time you crossed the Rhine, or?
No, that was after the Rhine.
Okay.
After the Rhine, because I was with the 316th at that time, and we went down we went further down into England where we loaded up and everybody went across. In fact, we were, as I say, we were at the head of the first drop.
Okay.
And flew all the way back, and all you could see was aircraft coming at you.
Okay, so this now we've gotten, that's sort of March of 45, I think they called it Operation Varsity. It was sort of a large-scale paradrop with gliders and everything crossing the northern section of the Rhine River. Okay, basically take us through, okay, how much preparation did you have for that mission? To what extent did you know that you were going to be doing this?
You don't know that until you're there.
Okay.
You practice, like I say, we did a lot of night flights and everything else to get ready for this sort of thing. And actually, we flew in daylight. We didn't come in at night at all. We come in early morning. And there was landmarks that we had to watch. And then you drop off the leader, you know, and that's what you do.
Okay. Now, were you towing the leader? Or the leaders, I mean, the rope, is the leader the aircraft or the rope that connects the aircraft to the glider? You see, we should drop off the leader.
No, we go off. Yeah, you see them. If he's up front, when he finds a drop zone, they start falling out, and you're back here like this on an angle. See, and you give the green light.
All right.
Because they're all, you know, you're close, because that's predetermined, and all the paratroopers are all lined up, ready to go, standing by the door.
Okay, so basically, you're taking paratroopers over that day.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Basically take us through that mission. I mean, how does the day? Did you know the day before that you were going to take paratroopers, or do you just they wake you up and tell you?
Yes, we knew we were going to take paratroopers. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a foregiven thing. And those paratroopers, all of them. I dropped that particular day. I dropped Canadians. But they are weighted so much, you have to help them up into the aircraft. Because everything you have to have for the first few days has got to be on them. You know.
Okay, so you're packing all of these guys up, and then you're flying, and so you're watching the lead plane in your formation, and then it drops, and then you drop in sequence following it.
You give them the caution light, you know, to get up there and hook up to the static line, and there's probably 10, 15 minutes before they drop. Although the English, when you give them about a 15-minute, they'll drink a cup of tea first before they do anything else. It's typical English. And I'm not being derogatory when I say that, but yeah, that's what you do. You drop off, just like bombing, you drop off the leader itself, because they're supposed to be the one that determines the spot. But yeah, it's fast. We were near the front, so we didn't get into, although you look out there and you see tracers coming up at you, and all of a sudden you see a turn to him. You think he's not very far off. Well, yes, if he jumps ahead, he's going to nail you, you know?
Yeah. Okay. There was anti-aircraft fire. Were there any German aircraft that you saw, or just
no,
anti-aircraft
not at that time.
fire?
No, we didn't see. It was all, well, we come in pretty low. We come in at 400 or 500 feet.
Okay.
We don't want to be any higher than that because they don't want to be in the air any longer than they have to be on the parachute.
Okay. Now, were the chutes rigged so that they would pop open automatically as they went out of the plane?
And that's what the static line is for.
Right.
They drop off and that pops back chute.
Yeah, because you don't have any margin for error if you fly that low.
No.
You've got to open that chute right away.
The one thing you must do, you drop off the left-hand side of the aircraft, you got to keep it straight and level. Because if you go like in there, they might hit the tail back here. See, because they haven't dropped far enough away.
Okay. Now, was that the most dangerous mission you flew?
Knowingly, yes. Because it was supposed to be a milk run, and when they say that, look out. Button up. It's going to be tough. Because, you know, we got there, and they were firing everything you could think of at us. Because, you know, I wasn't pulling gliders. We were dropping troopers.
Right.
The gliders were coming in behind us.
Yeah. And you say you lost a number of the planes out of your group when you...
Well, like I said, I lost my buddy right there. Because the whole crew, there was a 5-man crew on there, and you could see his right engine go full of flames in the left, and down they went, you know. But about that time, I saw that, you're pretty busy because you want to get out of there.
Yeah.
You know, formation ceases at once they're dropping, you're clear. You pour everything to the firewall and you drop and you get out of there. You know, out of the zone as quick as you can.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, did your plane take any damage, or did they miss you?
They missed me. Both of my ships on the wing got well, one of them was almost junked because of it. Got so many holes in it, you know. But they'll fly.
All right. And then after that, now, did they move you over to the base in France while the war was still going on? Or was that after the war was over when you did that?
Afterwards.
Okay. So May or June or something?
Yeah, yep. Then I went to Poivre. Then from Poivre we went to Villacoublay, which is in the south end of Paris. Mm-hmm. And from there, we transferred over to Orly Field, which is now...
That's Orly Airport.
Yeah.
That's still there.
Yeah. That's there. And probably the others are still there. Well, Le Bourget was there and still there now too. But that was a grass field. We come in there quite often on that too when we bring in wounded.
Okay.
You know.
Okay. So basically, tell me the different kinds of things that you carried there when you're in Europe in those last months. You had paratroopers. What else? Yeah,
the paratroopers. But we carried, like I said, gasoline. We carried any kind of food, clothing, whatever supplies they needed. Whatever they needed, because we could get there in hours, where trucks would take days.
Right.
And we could go, you know, the mud didn't bother us. Well, almost. Some of the fields are a little muddy.
Okay. And did you also land in Germany when you were flying?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Landed in fact, I was in the start. It wasn't called the airlift yet, but we did it already. Started in there, going into Tempelhof and resupplying people up there.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And that's a small airfield too, and it's pinned in with buildings all the way around, so you kind of have to drop into it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, at the time you were doing that, what sort of attitude did people have toward the Russians? Were they just still our allies at that point, or?
I couldn't tell you, to be honest with you, because I didn't get involved. I was pretty much there.
Okay.
I didn't, you know, the Germans were. I think probably the least communicable with the French, and still are to this day. You know, they weren't as happy as they could be.
All right. Yeah. What sort of contact did you have with civilians, especially once the war is over and things loosen up a little bit?
Not a whole lot. We were pretty busy all the time. We would go into a field, we'd unload and go back and get a little whatever after we do. You know, our flying was primarily that.
Okay.
Because as time went on, we became also hospital ships as well. Mm-hmm. And we'd go up and go right up to the front of the lines there, as close as we could get in there, and we'd load up a whole set of wounded. Some very wounded, some not too many. Some of them could walk, some could not.
Yeah.
Some were ambulatory, some were not.
All right. Now, how long did you stay in Europe after the war was over?
Almost a year.
Okay.
A little over a year, almost. Yeah.
All right. Now, at that point, I mean, was that basically just the Army Air Corps was just keeping you as long as they felt like keeping you at that point, or had you volunteered to stay on?
There again, you don't have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them that had more time, they left sooner.
Right.
It came into a point system. I don't remember what our points were. I got called in, and everybody got called into a new CO, and he said, well, would you fly for me and so forth? I said, well, sure, I'd be happy to fly for you. But I'd like to go home too sometime, you know. Well, it was quite some time after that before I got my order to go home, but it was in June of 45, 46.
46?
46.
Okay, yeah, so about a year after.
Yeah.
Okay, now during that last year, I mean, did you get a chance to do any kind of touring or visiting places? Did you get any time off?
A little bit, yep. Went down to Nice and Cannes, places like that. Sometimes we would we'd go into the flight office and say, hey, well, I say we, because there was 3 guys of us, we went together. Don't look for us for 2-3 days, we'll be back.
Okay. And would you just take your plane and go, or did you get a Jeep?
You just get whatever way, train, bus, whatever you can do, or sometimes hitchhike.
Okay.
Just see the country, you know. And no particular reason of why where we wanted to go or how fast we had to get back. But the first thing we get back, we check in and said, okay, and then we'd fly again like crazy.
Right.
That somebody else has some time off.
Okay. Now, back when you were based in England, did you get any time off there?
No.
Okay. Were you pretty much flying every day you could fly?
Pretty much. I had one trip I went to England to London. Down there, a couple of guys went down there for that one time, and that's the only time we had in England there. Didn't get to see too much.
All right.
See a lot from the air, but not much from the ground.
Okay. So you get into June of '46. Finally, your number comes up, and you get to go home.
Yes.
How do they get you home?
Well, I had to go from there to Munich. I was in Paris, stationed outside of Paris at Orly Field,
Right.
just at Bout Rouge. Put us on a train, take us to Munich. You know, that's quite a long ways. That's
Yes.
another couple of days each way, you know, and nights. And so that's the same thing when it came time. We got, I don't know what we had to go there, get checked out physically and stuff like that. It was at the hospital. And then they put us back on and they took us all the way to Le Havre. We transported everybody else. They wouldn't even transport us in the airplane because the fuel was right out. I used to land there. And the fuel's right there, you know. Went on a train.
All right.
Yeah, to Le Havre. Stayed there maybe 4 or 5 days and got on board ship.
Okay.
And it was a Victory ship.
All right. And so what was that trip like?
It was a smaller ship. And again, when that hit rough weather, the props came out of the water and they had to cut down. I mean, it was 24 hours where you could just tell it was, you know, really, really rough. But we were on our way home, so, you know, it's okay.
Okay.
Went back into Camp Kilmer.
All right. So you come back to New Jersey, and then do they process you right there and discharge you, or what happens next?
No, from there I went to Great Lakes outside of Chicago. And that's where they processed me, and there was about 3 or 4 of us together. We got processed. We spent a couple of days there, and they processed it, say, okay, you're ready to go home.
Okay. Now, did they ask you to sign up for the reserves at that point?
No.
Okay.
No, they didn't say a word about
You
it.
just go home.
Yeah.
All right. Now, once you finally go home, what do you do?
First thing I go home, I don't do anything. I'm getting paid for 3 months in a row because I've had all that time built up on me.
Okay, so you
know?
got that leave
So
time
I'm
there,
just kind of, then I go down and see my friends, just, you know, kind of get reacclimated to that there. Then I finally figured, well, and my dad had a lot there. He was on Division Avenue. And I started helping him a little bit. Stayed with him for a while, but it wasn't too long. I mean, I can't tell you exactly, but it was maybe within the first 6 months or less. I found out about the reserves, and that's when I went down and I joined the reserves. So I had a short stand in there where I was not.
the military.
Yeah.
Then you joined the reserves, and how long did you stay in the reserves?
I had a total of 30. I got out of the reserves and retired in June of 27th of 76.
Okay, and what rank were you by that time?
Lieutenant Colonel.
All right. Now, what did the reserve duty consist of?
Classes, primarily classes, and marching in parades. I mean, but it's different now, and we wanted it to be like it is now. Then the government was very tight about it. They wanted you to stay. They wanted you to be ready. They want, you know, call you anytime, and. But we had different classes and so forth. I taught some of the classes, and as time progressed, I picked up AFSC, Air Force Specialty Code number. It was my pilot, was my primary. I picked up 3 additionals as time went on, because I took one in Empire was one of the places, Fort Carson was another place, so I went down on radar and became a radar operator as well. And I was with the CO there, and he said, see that major there? And he said, he's going to get riffed. All he wants to do is fly. We can't have that. He wouldn't do any more than that. So shortly thereafter, I'm sure he was bumped out.
Okay. Now, did you still get to fly?
Yes, I did some flying there. In fact, I don't know if you remember or not, when the old field was here at Madison, on the Madison, that field airport.
Before my time here, yeah.
That's before your time, okay. We had TC-6 there, the Texan. We flew that. They had them here, and every time I had time, I'd just go out there and pick up a plane and go fly around. And then other times we had to go to Detroit. A bunch of us go there, we'd fly there, and we went to Selfridge and got flying for some time. Finally, that phased out. They were foolish, I thought, because they should have got like they do now. They make a reservist, and a real outfit. We had lots of people. We had hundreds of in reserves here in Grand Rapids.
Yeah. But they weren't using them for Korea, or they weren't using them for Vietnam or anything like that?
Unless they had a specific reason for a particular one.
Right.
Yeah, it was individuals.
Okay. Now, what kind of work did you go into once you were back? I mean, did you just stay in the car a lot, or what else did you do?
No. I went from the car lot, then I went into insurance for 5 years with Metropolitan, and I didn't like what was happening. I didn't like the way it was running, so I quit that. And I went back, started my own business in mobile home repairs and stuff like that. Then I had a chance to get into, with another fellow from Muskegon, we had a mobile home transportation. I did that for 20-some years.
Okay.
And a company for,
In a variety of things.
Repair,
All right.
setup.
Okay. When you look back at the time that you spent in the military, especially that active duty period during World War II, what sort of effect do you think that had on you?
I enjoyed it. I really did. I enjoyed being in the military. I really did. To this day, I really say I'd do it again. Because like I say, I got the radar, I got personnel and administrative officer, and I became the ground equipment maintenance officer. You do that on short tours of duty. You keep building your time up and get these here, and that kind of helps your. When I was in administration, we had 5 different flights in the state here: Traverse City, Battle Creek, Muskegon, Lansing. We would go there and check the records. And I used to tell people, well, ROPA board, that's a Reserve Officers Promotion Board. Your profile there is your picture of you. You can't talk to them. You have to talk to this. So if you got anything to say, put it in there. And we would go there and spend, I say we would be 4 of us guys, we'd take car, and we'd go to each one of these and make an appointment. And we'd probably spend about 3-4 hours there, go through every one of their paperwork, make sure everybody's up to date, any changes or anything, put it on a production line type thing, but it's, it's nice to sit down one-on-one. What I did then, I made large graphs of every form so I could put it up there and say, this is what you have to have. Now look at it. If you got a question, put your name, we'll take care of it. So you were taking care of 30, 40, 50 people at one time. And that worked real well, All
right. A little bit different kind of question. When you were based in England and then in France, did you have the same crew the whole time? Did you work with the same people, or did they rotate?
Rotate, yep. We were probably, the troop carrier was probably more that way, You rotated with who was available at the time.
Because I guess the combat missions, if you're flying fighters or bombers and so forth, they were counting the total number of missions and things, and there were regularly scheduled breaks in between and that kind of stuff. But for you guys, they didn't do it that way.
No.
A different kind of duty.
There was no. We went up there in the back I don't know how many times we crossed the line. It's hard to say. It didn't count.
Okay. Did you have sort of a regular kind of group of friends or a couple of buddies that you spent a lot of your time with when you were in the air? I mean, you talked about going and touring around with some of them.
Yes. You get together. Like I said, there was 3 of us in Paris area there. We stuck together. We had time there, off time. We could go in town and spend some time. They had a club there, officers club we go into, and we'd eat there and stuff like that. Pretty much you build an acquaintance that way.
Yep.
Yeah. Prior to that, I joined up with Jeff and Ken in Poix because we got split when we got to Scotland. And I wound up with the 316th, and he wound up with, I think, with the 350th, or I'm not sure which one. Anyway, it wasn't far away. So then when I got transferred over to Poix, he was already there, and then we joined up again.
All right.
We spent the rest of the time together.
Okay. Now, if you think back to that time that you spent in Europe, are there particular incidents or memories, things that tend to come back to you a lot that you haven't brought into the story here yet?
Such as?
Just things that are either interesting or funny or that kind of stand out in your mind.
Well, there's a lot of things happened when I was flying. They're interesting things, and different things of that nature. On the ground, when we were in Prague, a couple of us would get on the train. We'd go down there to Paris and spend a little time, and come back the next day on the train and stuff like that. But we were pretty much busy then, more so, and we didn't get the time to be as buddy as we wanted to, you know. But yeah, flying in all, you flew in practically every kind of weather you could have.
Right.
And weather predictions were not like they are today. I can tell you an instance, we were coming out of Belgium, there was 3 of us, actually 4 of us. We had a lead plane, he was going to take us out. It was real murky. And he got on he took off, well, we lost him, So I said, well, I'll get him on wings and we'll take off. We did. We flew at treetop level in order to stay in formation. Then we got over the coast and we had to go up. We got into weather and we got into ice, severe icing. And you got the icing equipment and stuff. But I didn't know we were going to make it through this year because whether we were going to be able to take the ice load that gets up there. Because eventually it will build up on your wings, even with the de-icing and with the fluid. I had probably about 1.5 inches, 2 inches ice on the windshield, even with the de-icing fluid. Probably flew, I would say, it was light, and probably flew 2, 3, 4 minutes out of the storm before I knew it. Then it was clear. So we could have just as well gone into the channel if you stalled out, you're done. But you don't know that. And where do you go back to? You learn to be self-sufficient real quick, like over there. Not like in the States. That's why I say they were a little remiss on some of that in the States. They didn't teach you how rough it was going to be. You're on your own, because we were different than the bombers and fighters. We went quite often singular to 3 or 4, or maybe once in a while at large, but most of the time it was more independent.
All right. Okay, well, I think that probably pretty well takes care of it, at least for my questions. So I'd just like to thank you very much for coming in and talking to me.
I appreciate it very much. It's been a pleasure.
All right.
Yep.
There we go.